Okay. There are a ton of meditations available on the internet, and I wanted to do something that'd be a bit different, something that might actually help. So this is going to be a meditation on meditating, and I'm throwing this into the mix because I have a feeling a lot of people try to meditate without really knowing what they're supposed to do. People don't understand what meditation is, so meditating on meditating could be helpful, or it will be a complete disaster. But I think it's worth a try. And if I'm way off here, you have insight and want to share, please feel free to reach out. Comments down below. There should be an email down there as well. Let me know what you think. Okay. So with that, let's start off with what we know. Meditation is some sort of quieting or observing the mind for a sense of well-being. And that sounds pretty wonderful. The well-being part is pretty straightforward. It's good feeling, peaceful, there are less problems. I think it's generally understood that meditation improves the quality of our lives. But to realize that peaceful state of well-being, we must quiet the mind. And I have a feeling this is where we get lost. No one really explains what mind is, I think because no one really knows. It's often referred to as an abstract thing that exists, but not really. I mean, that really creates some problems for us meditators, because how do we find well-being if we can't find a mind to quiet first? This is where we're going to start. We're going to start by exploring mind. So for this meditation, you're welcome to sit and close your eyes, or stand with your eyes open, or walk and chew gum at the same time. It doesn't matter what happens while we meditate. What matters is that we observe mind. And for that, we'll begin with one very logical realization. Mind is not a thing we have. Mind is a process. I like the analogy here of a ruler. Okay, so a ruler is a thing. Your brain is a thing. You know, these are things, tangible. We can poke them. But mind is not a thing. It's intangible. It's because mind happens. So we can have a ruler the same way we can have a brain, but we wouldn't say we have a measure. Measuring is what we use the ruler for. Mind is measuring. Measuring is not a thing, it happens. You'll hear me say mind process throughout this meditation, and that's this terminology I use to remind me that it's a happening. There's no thing to control. It's really tempting to think the mind is the thing that measures, but that's just mind measuring itself into a thing again. There is no mind. There's just the process of measuring. And we give that process the label mind. Make sense? I'll say it one more time. A brain is a thing. A ruler is a thing. Mind is the process of measuring. So we label it mind process. And it can take some practice to get this, but stick with it. It is a process after all. Okay, on with our meditation, on with observing mind. Hopefully now we understand we're not looking for anything to observe. It's a process we're watching. And that process is measuring. Now, this is without a question where the challenge begins, okay? We try to measure how we measure. Mind process just can't get out of its own way. Take a moment to think about this. We're thinking about thinking to resolve problems with thinking. A process is attempting to process itself towards improvement. Mind is watching mind work. I mean, this is hard to do because we're the ones doing it. We are egotistical. I mean, we believe we can improve ourselves, or we believe there's something that needs improving. But a process can never process itself. It's impossible. If we catch ourselves thinking, I am meditating, that's an opportunity to realize we are in fact measuring. Mind is definitely involved. So it turns out it's impossible to meditate and know that you're doing it. And this applies to all aspects of meditating. So being successful at meditating, or awful at meditating, or getting anything from meditating. These are all measurements, which means mind process is working on itself, which means we're not meditating, we are minding. We'll continue to move forward here, but cautiously, knowing that it's quite impossible to do meditation. If we acknowledge or take credit for anything we are doing, we've measured and our meditation has ended. Meditation will just happen when we observe. If this confuses us in any way, let's not measure it. We know that's just mind process trying to understand what the hell we're talking about. We'll simply allow the process of mind to happen and continue on with our meditation. I think this meditation is going pretty good so far. I know that's a measurement, but anyways, okay. Hopefully we have a few things established. Mind is a process of measuring, not a thing. And this measuring process is there whenever we do anything. It's not a bad thing, good and bad, or measurements. Mind just happens. And more importantly, we're meditating, so we just observe it happening. Which brings us to this idea of observation. Now, for this, I use the analogy of a factory. We're going to take a moment here. We're going to imagine an old factory. I see it in my mind with the dirty windows and the red bricks and the big stacks on the roof. On one side, it has a large yard of raw materials. And on the other side, there's a big warehouse for all the finished product. This factory is going to be our brain. And inside will be our mind process. The yard of raw materials outside is our senses. All the inputs for our brain factory are out there. There's piles and piles of different tastes and sounds, and sights, smells, and different tactiles. It is a huge yard, just a massive amount of raw material inputs available for our brain factory to process. But we can't bring all of those inputs in at one time without completely overwhelming the system. So our factory has a controller that determines which inputs come in and when. And I like to think of a little guy named Adam Awareness. That's Mr. Awareness. So Awareness works on sort of the receiving dock of the factory. He works between the materials yard and the factory, controlling the flow of sense inputs. Now, it is no secret that Mr. Awareness can be a real a-hole, right? For the life of me, I don't understand some of the decisions Awareness makes. But that's not my concern when I'm meditating. When we meditate, we observe only. There are no judgments. I'm observing the factory process, and that's what's happening inside the factory. If I'm out in the materials yard analyzing how Awareness is doing his thing, I'm not inside the factory observing the process happening. And of course, we may not always agree with Awareness's decisions. Awareness may focus on a particular sound or smell when we think he should be focusing on a stockpile of feelings that need to be dealt with. But what we want does not matter when we meditate. Wanting is measuring, and we're observing. If we happen to notice that we are measuring, we simply head back inside and climb up into the rafters of the factory and observe the process as it happens. And a reminder, we are meditating right now. So we are accepting whatever Awareness wants to send in. If you're attempting to measure or make sense of what Awareness is sending you, don't try. Allow whatever comes in to just flow through. Come back inside, up into the rafters, and observe. Okay, we back up here together. Let's look down and sort of just observe what is happening in this factory. Our brain factory, like any factory, needs two things. We have to have both inputs and energy for a process to happen. And we've discussed the inputs and Mr. Awareness's role. Energy, unfortunately, is equally as mysterious. Our Real world factories have electrical energy or thermal energy or labor energy. Mind process uses life energy, as in we are alive. We have energy that allows us to sense the universe. We could talk about this energy for hours and get nowhere. Remember, we're meditating, so understanding is not our goal. Okay? We don't try to understand why awareness supplies the inputs he does. So let's not bother trying to understand how our factory keeps the lights on. And I appreciate that very few people will accept that. So we'll spend 1 minute on this energy. I'm part of a universe that is energy, which makes me energy. So it's similar to mind, a process attempting to process itself. It's impossible for me to fully understand what I am a part of. Of course, that doesn't stop me or others from trying. People in all walks of life have names for this energy. Science calls it vacuum energy or quantum field energy. Religion has many names for this energy, one of which is God. Hippies call it love, and Jedis call it the Force. You can call it whatever you want in your meditation. It is your meditation. Because I explore mind and how mind measures it, whatever it is, this unnameable energy, I call this unnameable energy enjoyment. Right? So mind measures enjoyment. As I said, we could go on and on here, but we're meditating. Again, let's head back in, back up, and just observe. We're going to watch the inputs come in. We're alive with this unnameable energy, which allows us to measure. And then finished products move off towards the warehouse. We just observe. Because we're meditating, we remain inside the factory watching this. We don't need to do anything. The process just happens. We don't need to understand, and we don't need to judge. Any of those activities of measuring, that just puts us back down into the process again. So just do that. And that's meditation. Thanks for listening. You probably still have questions. That means you're measuring. I thought we were meditating. Okay. Maybe you just got bored of sitting up in the rafters and watching. And that does tend to happen when we meditate. Mind measures. Okay. A few measures of bonus extended meditation material here. Let's say we do ask, how is observing from the rafters helpful in any way? I think that's a fair question. I hope we've done a decent job of defining mind in this limited time, but we started by defining meditation as resulting in a feeling of well-being, which should benefit us. So where does this feeling well factor into our factory? Truthfully, I'm not sure it does. Sitting in the rafters removes all measurement. We would never think, I have so much well-being right now while we're meditating. The rafters don't really provide a good vantage point. There is no good or bad when you're only observing. I know this is contrary to what you may believe, but meditation isn't enjoyable, and there is no benefit from it. It just is. People are going to argue this, of course. Well, we meditate because it's good for us. I don't think we can say that while we're meditating. How can we? We can't do and observe at the same time. This is mind. Mind is so elusive. We can be sure that we're meditating, but it turns out we're down on the factory floor, just completely focused on one particular machine or nursing a particular input through the system. Mind is a doer, and there's nothing we can do about that. Mind loves to break down the process into parts that can be measured and understood. That need to understand will taint every effort we make to become free of mind. Let's be brutally honest here. How many of us meditate to understand why? But why is not an observation. We want to know why. Why this part of me does this and that part of me does that. Because if I can know that, and if I can bribe Mr. Awareness and have just the right inputs brought in for processing, then what? Well, we can control our mind, of course. But then what? What does control over mind ever give us? And this is ultimately the problem, if you want to measure it, the problem with mind. We incorrectly believe that if we can understand a process, we can then control it. And controlling it will give us what we desire. You see this everywhere in life. Science does this. Religion does this. I guess, to be fair, this meditation on meditation is doing this. We strive to understand so we can control and get what we desire. But do we even know what we desire? I think the answer to that question is in our warehouse of our factory, the warehouse of 10,000 things. And that's for all the Buddhists and Taoists out there. Okay. Every factory in the world, including our brain factory, produces things that bring enjoyment. Cell phones, diapers, electric screwdrivers, even the quote-unquote unuseful things like diet water and shoe umbrellas. And yes, those are real things that have been produced because someone believed it would bring enjoyment. And this is all things. You may disagree, but that's the problem. Measuring enjoyment is the problem. There are factories out there that create medical devices that save lives. There are factories out there that create weapons that take lives. How enjoyment is measured depends on which side of the line you stand. If we're up in the rafters and we meditate on this, we're just going to watch the process. This time, though, we know the layout, we know where we're watching from, so let's just really focus on the measuring. And I have to say, if you have made it this far through our meditation with me, thank you. And this is where meditation really gets fun. Okay. We observe, the inputs come in. Observe the measurement happening. Notice it's not the inputs we're measuring, is it? They're just things. We are measuring something else. The things are what we measure against. It turns out what we care about, and really the only thing mind can ever measure, is feeling. We'll find this to be true. We're going to ask awareness to send in some ideas now and observe. Okay, how many of us would like more money? Do we desire money? No. What we desire is the feeling of having money. We want the feeling we get when we buy something, or the feeling of not worrying how we'll pay our bills. Every day we exchange money for feelings. We don't buy things, we buy feelings. Do we want a fancy car? No. We want the feeling of driving down the road, the feeling of people being envious of us, the feeling of people desiring us, or wanting what we have, or even just the feeling we get when we look at a nice car. How we measure is unique to each of us. Do we really need that vacation? No. We really want the feeling of no responsibility, the feeling we associate with a vacation. We know that even the best vacation will get old after a while. And this applies to all things, even the people in our lives that we make things. Do we want a soulmate? No. We want the feeling of having someone like that. How do we measure a soulmate other than through the feelings we experience? We associate things with the feeling, but the thing is not the feeling. I call this feeling enjoyment. Again, it's the unnameable energy that's out there. And it's not an emotion. Emotion is the result of how you measure the feeling. This feeling, this enjoyment, is just pure energy. And it's what fuels our mind and what we measure. Do we see how this factory works? Mind is some sort of a man-made scale, a ruler that sits within a sea of energy, measuring what is already there. But there is no measurement in the universe. There's no cosmic ruler out there. There are no units or amounts. We've created all of those things. Things are just words and labels we use to express feelings. We can see this for ourselves. Let's turn our awareness to anything right now. Any sense that awareness decides is of interest. That input comes into our mind process and we recognize a feeling. That's what we meditate on. That is mind process happening. There's a measurement there. Do I have enough or do I want something else? Notice that and observe. The feeling we experience is the measurement. Do I have enough or do I need more? That process is mind, and it happens constantly. I can be part of that process when it happens, or I can just observe it happening. And when I meditate, I observe. From the rafters, we get a more complete picture of it. And through practice, we see the energy we measure. We see that it's the same energy that performed the measurement. So how can we need something we already are? And this is what's so crazy. The act of measuring is what divides us. Once we're divided, we can then want more. But that's just mind, and mind is confused. We are energy, so we have energy. Or to use the other terms, we are enjoyment. So we already have enjoyment. But when we measure, we forget who we are. We want more. When we measure, we're mind. We forget who we are. Anyhow, this has gone very long, so we're going to conclude. There's so many more things to explore here. We can go in deeper into what feelings are, what happens if we turn off the inputs, what does awareness do then, can mind ever truly stop? But to wrap this one up, what is meditation? That's a really good question. Sit in the rafters and watch that question pass through the factory. What is being measured with that question? What do we want out of this moment, and how do we measure it as not being enough? I think that is meditation, just watching the factory do its thing. And I know any meaning or purpose or thing or result being measured, that means I've come down from the rafters. Meditation happens whenever I climb back up and watch again, not controlling the process and not getting anything out of it. And if you feel that you got nothing out of this meditation, I guess we were successful. Until next time, thanks for listening.